sound issue with our microphone. All right, so let me just try that one more time. So good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Coffee with Matt. We're here on the 2nd of October, and hard to believe that summer is over and fall has arrived. And we're really excited for this fall season. Wonderful time of year, obviously, for all sorts of stuff, but definitely great for getting outside. These are my favorite 2 months. October and November are my favorite 2 months for planting. I really like planting at this time of year. Our warm soils encourage root growth. The water needs of trees is really going down, so when we do get some rain or you do give a tree some water at this time of year, that water is going to stick around quite a bit more. So really a great time for tree planting. Virtually any tree species can be planted at this time of year. So if you're thinking about planting trees, maybe this would be a good talk for you, because the other thing that I love about Oak-tober is that it is Oak Awareness Month. So we call it Oak-tober here in the industry. In fact, a couple years back, or more than a couple of years back, the governor of Illinois signed some legislation dedicating Oak-tober, as Oak Awareness Month. So why would one tree species be more important than any other, though? It's probably a pretty good question to ask, but there's actually a lot of really good reasons why we have Oak-tober and Oak Awareness Month, specifically here in Illinois. So at one point, just the Chicago area alone, the Chicago region, if you will, which is typically kind of that, the 6 or so counties around the Chicago area where we're located, we kind of call that the Chicago region. And the Chicago region at one point, so prior to Euro-American settlement in the northern Illinois area here, we had approximately, or roughly, 1 million acres of oak canopy in our area. So it was a predominant species here. So prior to settlement, our state was predominantly tall grass prairies, some mixed woodlands, and oak savanna. So oak savanna is going to be characterized by more of an open setting. So an actual like hardwood forest, you're going to have more than 100 trees per acre or per hectare. So when you get into a savanna situation, you're going to start to see the trees are further apart. There's some grass underneath, more of a shorter grass underneath. The trees may be up at the top of a hill. They might just be out in the open anywhere, but that's what we would call an oak savanna. So we had oaks in our woodlands, we had oaks in the savannas, and we had a lot of them. One of the reasons that we had a lot of them is that we had a lot of fire in our area, both from lightning and also from the Native Americans who were setting fires to for a variety of things. One reason that it's believed that they were doing that is to push game in a certain direction, so that they could hunt a little bit easier. So, but that fire would open things up for oaks to grow. Oaks do not love oak seedlings, like this little one here next to me, this little Bur Oak seedling, does not love to grow in a very heavily shaded situation. So if it's too shady, if that shade is too dense, these little oak seedlings, even though the acorn may have been planted in the ground by a squirrel or whatever, they may not grow well at all because it's just too shady for them. So that fire would really clear things out. It would clear out the older growth from the previous season of the prairie and give an opportunity for an oak to grow and sprout. It would clear out some of the other brushy type plants that would grow in there and would give opportunity for oak seedlings to grow. Now, fast forward into the 1930s, and that 1 million acres of oak canopy that we had is now down to about 280,000 acres. So obviously just roughly 25% there is all that's remaining by 1930. And so going back to what I first started with there, with why do oaks have their own month? Why is it important that we talk about them? And one is that it was the predominant species here, so just that's what was growing here natively, and we want to try to restore that. But even more importantly is the fact that more than 500 different species of insects, and you've probably heard me talk about this before, but more than 500 different species of insects rely on oaks for some part of their life cycle. But the insects, then, there are other birds, salamanders, mammals, all sorts of other animals that rely on those insects as part of their food source. And so if the oaks go away, then the food that let's say the northern flicker or some of these other birds, the insects that they're feeding on are gone. And so then that bird goes away as well. And it just kind of starts a chain reaction of events that means that we don't have certain species of animals and birds and whatnot that would normally be living here, and that's a sad thing. So in order to keep the oak system going, we need to talk about oak. So that's why they came up with Oak Awareness Month, or Oak-tober. So as I mentioned, back in 1930, we're down to 280,000 approximate acres remaining of oak woodlands. And then by 2010, we're actually down to only 175,000 acres, or less than 11% of what we had. Here in Kane County, they estimate that we have 11.4% of what we had before. And not only is it down to 11.4%, but that's more of what we would call an oak remnant. So there's evidence of oaks. There are some oaks remaining, but it isn't quite as robust and healthy of an oak ecosystem as it once was. So we're down to 11%, but the quality of that 11% is also not as good as it once was. So that's why we've got Oak-tober month, and that's why I wanted to take a Saturday morning and just share a little bit with you about oaks. One of the things that I like to mention to people when we're talking about oaks, because I think that oaks get a bad rap for being slow growing. And oaks are really not slow growing. They're actually relatively fast growing in their youth, and then slow down in their older age. So, a lot of times they will grow a foot to 2 feet, oftentimes more per year in their youth, and then when they get to be about 30 years old, then they start to slow down. So right behind me here, of course you can't see the entire thing, but right behind me here we have a beautiful swamp white oak. And that swamp white oak was actually a tree that I planted as a replacement for a white ash that used to be here. So we used to have a beautiful ash right here. When ash borer came around in 2005, 2006, we decided that it was time to remove our ash trees and get something else started in their place, and I chose this swamp white oak. So it's only been in the ground for, roughly 15-ish years, and height-wise, I'm going to guess we're looking at about 25 to 30 feet tall right now in just 15 years. It has a trunk diameter of every bit of 12 inches or so. So it's really done very well. What you can't see on the camera is that it is planted in absolutely garbage soil. It's right in the middle of our sales yard. We have a lot of gravel so that we can make it a little drier and easier for people to walk around out here. And so it's planted in gravel and garbage, and it doesn't get cared for very well, but it is just absolutely thriving. So that's a swamp white oak, and we're going to talk a little bit about the different varieties of oaks that you can plant, the ones that are native here in Illinois, and where to best site them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that here today. But one of the things that I wanted to mention here, I grabbed a little chart off of the public land survey, and I just thought that this was kind of neat. If you know me, or if you know me well, you know that I'm a numbers guy in addition to a tree guy, and I'm fascinated by numbers. So I just want to look at this little chart here. So what this chart is showing me is the dominance of various tree species in approximately 1830, in a public land survey that was done around 1830, and then in an equivalent survey that was done in 2010. So the white oak, which we're going to talk about, I've got some leaves, actually it looks like my white oak leaf. Oh no, that's my Bur Oak leaf. Here's my white oak leaf. So here's my white oak leaf, So the white oak, which was for sure a predominant species here in Illinois, in 1830, our woodlands had 41.2% white oak in them. We are now down to 6.9%. The Bur Oak had 13% dominance, and now we're at about 8%. Red Oak was 6.6% of our canopy, and is now 5.7%. Silver Maple was 0.01%. It is native here in Illinois, but back in 1830, just 0.01% of our tree canopy was silver maple. It is now 9.44%. Why is that? Well, back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s specifically, we just went on a run and just planted tons and tons and tons of silver maple. They were very fast growing. They were easy to site. You could plant them just about anywhere. And now we just have a plethora of them. They also are prone to heavy seed production. So those are those little helicopters that we used to collect as kids and throw up in the air. Well, those seeds are very fertile. And so they start to pop up all over the place, specifically in lower wetland areas. So we have a lot of silver maple now. Almost 10% of our tree canopy is now silver maple. Box elder tree, which we basically had 0% back in 1830, and we now have almost 8%. That's another one where the box elder tree, which is where we get those box elder bugs from, the box elder tree is actually a maple and also has a little helicopter-like seed. It is very tolerant of poor and disturbed soils. That's where it loves to grow. And so we see that a lot because we've had a lot of soil disturbance happening here in the last 100 years, basically, as people moved into the area and settled, and then in the Chicago area, and then moved further west. You know, we've got heavy farming equipment. We have trucks and tractors and all that. We have natural areas that were disturbed, trees that were cut down for lumber production, all of those kind of things, and then opportunistic species like box elder, silver maple, etc., have grown in their place. They also tend to be much faster growing than the oak seedlings, and so that they can basically outpace those oak seedlings. And then, as I mentioned, small oak trees do not love heavy shade at all. So when you get another species that can grow higher and faster and get those light, the light from the sun, then these little trees are not going to be able to grow very well. Just doing some other ones here. We had very few ash. We actually, as of 2010, had 5% green ash. We had almost 0% back in 1830. Black cherry was about 0% and is now 4.5%. The only one that remained almost completely steady was black walnut. Black walnut, we had 2.18%, and we now have 2.5%. And then the American elm, we had 9% of our tree canopy was American elm, and then because of Dutch elm disease, it is down to only 2.5%. So just kind of some interesting statistics there on what's happened to our oak canopy. So just the three species of oaks that I mentioned, white oak, bur oak, and red oak, that totaled 40, 50, a full 60%. So 60% of our tree canopy was oak, and we are now down to 19%. So that's a huge difference right there. And then obviously the numbers bear that out, as I mentioned, when we were at 1 million acres and are now down to about 175,000 acres. So huge difference there. So let's talk about what oaks you can plant and how you can help. One of the things that there's an organization called the Chicagoland Region Trees Initiative, and their entire goal, as the name suggests, is to plant more trees and be very specific about where they plant these trees in areas that are that just have less of a tree canopy. So that's some of that are urban areas that have been, all the trees have been wiped out and buildings have been put up. Some of them are lower economic areas that haven't been able to, whether it's individuals or public land or whatever, they haven't been able to plant trees and replace trees that have died due to old age, disease, climate, etc. So part of it is that, but part of it is also trying to connect the public land. So, all around the area here, we look in Kane County, and we've got some beautiful forest preserves here in Kane County. I think about the Dick Young Forest Preserve down in Batavia, right on Nelson Lake Road, beautiful forest preserve. Right across the street from us here, if we turned the camera around, you'd see it. That is the Campton Forest Preserve. It's a beautiful, beautiful forest preserve. A lot of prairie, but a really nice oak woodland with some nice little hilly trails in there. But one of the things that Chicagoland Region Trees Initiative looks at is we've got these big, beautiful patches of native lands or natural lands, and how do we connect those so that the animals and the wildlife and all of that kind of stuff don't have these little like islands, but rather have an entire canopy that's connected by a network of trees. So they're looking at private land and how do you connect these public lands with private land tree corridors. So it's a really neat thing. If you ever have some time, check them out. It's, like I said, it's called Chicagoland Region Trees Initiative. So that's what we're looking at here is you've got some land. You might live somewhere between this Campton Forest Preserve and Dick Young Forest Preserve in Batavia. So how can we connect that corridor? Well, we can connect it by, if everybody's planting oak trees between here and there, it actually makes it pretty easy. So let's talk about the different types of oaks that you could plant and why you might want to choose one over the other. So we will start with the white oak. So this is a white oak leaf here. Generally, oaks are categorized by two specific groups. There's the red oak group and the white oak group, and I'll mention which ones are which. So the white oak, as obviously the name suggests, is part of the white oak group. White oaks tend to have a more rounded lobe out on the end. They don't come to a little point. Anything in the red oak family tends to have a little point out at the end. So you can kind of see that on this leaf here. We'll talk a little bit about those. So the white oak is definitely one of those that gets a bad rap for being slow growing. It's actually relatively fast growing in its youth and then slows down when it reaches about age 30. So you can actually get a pretty nice sized white oak tree in a short amount of time. So if you're one of those that says, hey, I'd like to actually see some shade out of this tree, while I'm still living in this house or while I'm still living, period, white oak is still a great choice. White oak, once it reaches full maximum size, could be anywhere from 60 to maybe even 80 feet tall, and somewhere between 40 and 80 or 100 feet wide. They say, Matt, that's a huge tree. I don't have room for a tree like that in my yard. Well, that's okay for two reasons. One, neither of us are probably going to see that. But more importantly, is in a suburban or urban situation, trees are never going to get as big as they would in a natural in their natural environment. So when you talk about looking at, hey, I live in a subdivision, they took off all the topsoil, they built 1,000 homes, they put in roads and all of those different kind of things, that tree is probably going to reach, my estimation, and I've never seen a scientific study to support this, but 30 years of being in this industry has taught me that you will maybe see about 50% of what that tree could actually get to. So when you look at a white oak as maybe getting 60 feet tall and 100 feet wide, cut that by 50%, and that's probably what size you're looking at in your landscape. So maybe 30 or 40 tall, and maybe 30 or 40 or maybe 50 feet wide. And that's still going to be many, many years into the future. So you can still plant a white oak even though you have a quarter-acre lot or something like that. I wouldn't plant it right next to the house, but moving a few feet away from the house, or maybe a few more than that, would be good. It's another question that I get asked often is how close to the house can I plant a bigger, a full-size shade tree like an oak or a maple, something like that. And I actually think that you can plant trees much closer to homes than most people would suggest. I read an awful lot about it, but when you look at modern day foundations of homes, they are concrete. It is thick and dense. Oaks are not going to, or trees in general, rarely are going to bother the foundation of a modern home. That's number one. Number two, you will have to prune it off of the house at some point, but trees naturally will grow to where there's light and other resources such as water and other nutrients. So what you'll tend to see is kind of a 180-degree tree. So there'll be a flat side against your home or building, but the other side of that tree, what you see from the perimeter, is going to be big and full and healthy, as long as you keep trimming any branches off that may grow back towards the house, so that you don't have branches rubbing against the siding or hanging over the roof, causing issues that way. But you get a lot more economic benefit out of that tree the closer it is to the home. The closer it is to the home, the more it's blocking the wind and the sun, so it's cooling the house in the summertime. It is blocking some wind and keeping the house a little warmer during the winter months. So there's a lot of economic benefit there. They also tend to soak up a lot of water so that you don't have all that water going down into your sump pit and that type of thing. So this is the white oak. It would generally favor a heavier soil. So our heavy clay here is not really a big deal for it. It would not love an overly wet location. So probably not the best if you have a corner of the yard where water pools or something in the springtime when it rains. So you might want to pull out of that just a little bit. But otherwise, you can site a white oak just about anywhere. They're a really good tree, and they have a nice fall color. White oak will range anywhere from a yellowy orange to some kind of a sort of like a rusty pink color. So they have some really nice fall color. They will color a little bit later, so you can see I just picked this one today, and that is still fully green. There's no fall color happening on that yet, even though as I look across the trees in the sales yard here and across the landscape, I'm starting to see some fall color. Part of that is because of drought stress, part of that is because of the time of the year. So that's our white oak. Keeping in the white oak family and some of those predominant species here in Illinois, I've also got a Bur Oak right here. Bur Oak are probably my favorite. I love the Bur Oak are the ones that tend to be these big gnarly trees. So when you drive around to some of the forest preserves or some of the parts of town out here where all the trees were not cleared off, and you see one of these big massive oak trees with gnarly branches and really corky bark on it, that most likely is a Bur Oak. So Bur Oak and white oak are very similar. The leaves look very similar. You tend to have a little bit deeper lobes on the white oak, and the top of the leaf tends to be a little bit fuller. You can kind of see here those lobes are not as deep as they are, or I should say maybe pronounced as they are on the white oak. And then, as I mentioned, Bur Oak tends to have a pretty corky kind of rough bark. So a little bit more interest there, which is cool. Fall color is going to be yellowy orange to an orangey brown. Nice for autumn, not exceptionally showy. But the interesting thing about Bur Oak can, we would commonly find those high and dry on like an oak savanna. So on a little hill in the prairie, you might find some Bur Oak trees, but you also may find Bur Oak down in a little lower area as well. So that gives them a kind of a wide range, which is why we probably had so many of them around here prior to settlement again. So Bur Oak, just like white oak, is a big tree species. But again, in a residential landscape, in a typical subdivision or kind of suburban landscape, you're probably not going to see more than about 30 or 40 feet tall by 30 or 40 feet wide eventually. So. Big truck passing by here, so we'll let that go, and then so this is actually a leaf off of swamp white oak. So that's the tree that's right here behind me. Swamp white oak is probably the most versatile of the oak trees. So swamp white oak can be grown, as the name suggests, swamp white. It can be grown in a wet soil. It, however, does not need a wet soil at all. We commonly grow them as a parkway tree. We put them in very urban environments. We put them in very natural areas. So really versatile tree. So if you're just like, hey, I don't even know what kind of soil I have, I don't know what the drainage is like or anything like that, you can be pretty safe picking a swamp white oak. Swamp white oak doesn't have the deep lobes that the previous two oaks had. It is very dark green on the top and has kind of a fuzzy white underside. So its botanical name is Quercus. So Quercus is the oak genus. And then the species is bicolor, so Quercus bicolor. And so it's bicolor because the top is green and the bottom is white. And so that's why they call it a bicolor oak or swamp white oak. Has a really neat bark. Especially on the younger trees, you'll have a sort of an exfoliating bark that will be brown, gray, and white. So it'll be the older bark, the brown and gray stuff will peel off with, and it'll kind of expose a whiter underside. So really interesting bark, really cool leaves. One of the other things that I like about specifically swamp white oak, but most of the oaks in general, if you look at this leaf here, this leaf, again, was just picked off today, and if we look at the tree behind me here, you know, it's pretty hard pressed. I can actually pick out about maybe 3 or 4 yellow leaves on this tree. So if we look up there, there's just a couple. But this has been a pretty rough growing season, right? It's been exceptionally hot. It's been a pretty dry year, although this tree does get some kind of passive irrigation, I guess, because the plants that we're retailing around it are getting watered, so it's going to get some water there. But if you go out to a forest preserve or even just some of the city parks around here, and you see swamp white oak that are, you know, 6, 8, 10, 12 years old, they still look just like this. They look just as good today on October 2nd as they did on May 15th or June 1st. So they don't show the effects of a hot, dry summer. Doesn't mean they're not affected by it, but just aesthetically, they really look great. So I really like swamp white oak for a residential landscape. It's probably one of my favorites for smaller lots, for suburban, you know, subdivision type soils, that kind of thing. That's a really good one. The other one that I like for suburban, street or parkway trees, commercial plantings, or very disturbed, crummy soils is this one right here. So this is a tree called a Chinkapin Oak. It is an Illinois native oak. We would tend to find this growing on sandy soils or limestone bluffs. So along the Fox River or the Illinois River, where you've got these big limestone bluffs, things like that, you would find these growing in those shallow soils on top of that rock. The reason that I mention that is 2 things. One, we do have a lot of limestone in our soil, or a lot of lime in our soil here in northern Illinois. As I've mentioned before on previous talks, our soil pH tends to be pretty high here, pretty alkaline. So our soil pH, without doing a test, I can guess most of your soil pH is going to be somewhere between 7.2 and 7.6. So that's pretty alkaline. So some of our other trees, like some of the other red oak family here, they're not going to love that high pH soil. And we oftentimes may have problems with what's called chlorosis, which is a nutrient deficiency disease. And so planting things like pin oak in a high alkaline soil, you're not going to have really good success there. But Chinkapin oak is really, really good for an area like that. So it has this really cool leaf. It almost looks like a chestnut, which we don't have a lot of anymore either because of chestnut blight. But it has a much more toothed-edged leaf than any of the other oaks. So it's pretty distinctive looking. It also has kind of a scaly exfoliating bark, relatively fast growing, and really tolerant, as I mentioned, really tolerant of poor soils. So those are a few of my favorites. I've got a couple others here that I'm going to mention. One of them is a member of the red oak family called a Shingle Oak, which doesn't actually have any points on its leaf, but has this very smooth edge. In fact, if you just pick this leaf off and handed it to someone who doesn't know any better, I would bet that 99 out of 100 would never guess that this is an oak tree, because it doesn't look anything like any of these other leaves, aside from the fact that it has held up very well to our hot, dry summer. Nice and dark green. It's got a little thicker leaf, which is one of the reasons that it doesn't dry out very quickly, and it holds up well to the winter or to the summer weather. So Shingle Oak is going to turn a really nice red color in the fall though. So excellent fall color, tolerant of urban soils. So that's Shingle Oak. Keeps a fairly upright, kind of oval shape, basically, maybe even slightly pyramidal. So it's a little more upright. It has a great shape, and it is tolerant of urban soil. So I do like that. We've actually planted quite a few of these in and around downtown Geneva for the Geneva Natural Resources Committee and City of Geneva. We've planted some of these, so you may find some of those around the downtown area. And then I've got two types of red oak over here. One is called scarlet oak and one is called red oak. They're actually very similar. So the red oak, this is actually a fairly small red oak leaf. When you get a nice big red oak, you might have leaves that are, 10 to 12 inches. I mean, they can really develop giant leaves. Our heavier wooded areas of Illinois, so like I mentioned before, when you have kind of a forest situation, or what would be called a forest, you're going to have more than like 100 trees per acre. And so the trees aren't going to be really spread out like I mentioned on the savanna. Predominant species in those areas would have been red oak, or the predominant oak would have been red oak. So red oak loves those dense woodland areas. It can take a little more moisture. So, kind of that woodland soil, it doesn't dry out quite as fast. It tends to be really rich. Oftentimes gets a little more, it's an area where water may collect a bit. So red oak would do really well in a situation like that. As the name suggests, red oak, it turns a beautiful red color in the fall. So great fall color, tolerant of a wide variety of soils. Is certainly better with the alkaline soils than pin oak, which is native here as well. Pin oak is definitely one that I recommend most people, unless you have a very specific location or very specific planting environment, that you stay away from pin oak. However, there is a variety called Hills oak, which I didn't bring. I didn't have one to show you. It leaf actually looks very similar to this one here, which is actually scarlet oak. So it has these deep lobes on the leaf, similar to the pin oak. In fact, it's pretty hard to tell them apart. But the Hills oak, which oftentimes gets called a northern pin oak, I like to call it a Hills oak so that there's less confusion there. Hills oak is an upright oval or pyramidal shaped tree. Sorry, I'm going to let this other truck pass so you can hear okay. Good time for a coffee break. Okay, so Hills oak, upright pyramidal habit. The pin oak and the Hills oak are both considered fast growing. They can put on 2 to 3 feet in a year, so pretty fast growing trees. Tolerant of the Hills oak, that is tolerant of our poor soils here. So heavier soils, more alkaline soil is not a problem for a Hills oak. And the fall color is exceptional. So rusty reds, bright reds, the fall color is really nice on that. And it also, like I mentioned, has that really neat, upright, almost pyramidal habit to it. So not real narrow like maybe like a pear or something. A little kind of full oval. Excuse me, sorry. Got bit by something. So a nice upright pyramidal habit with great fall color and really good tolerance to our high alkaline soils here. So that's the Hills oak. So those are just a handful of my favorite species to recommend for this area. We talked about all the different insects and things that are that use the oak as part of their life cycle, and some of the species that are greatly affected by the oak canopy, kind of the destruction of the oak canopy. There's a lot, like our red-headed woodpecker and the northern flicker that I mentioned earlier. Those are really in jeopardy as a result of the oak canopies diminishing. The blue-spotted salamander, which, anytime I mention, salamanders and things like that, people are like, we have those here? I can never see them. Well, one of the reasons we don't see them is we don't have too much of their habitat left. They also tend to like moist areas, so they're kind of underneath fallen leaves and in, kind of some of those darker, damper areas. So, a place that, people oftentimes don't go. So you're not going to see it walking across your green grass typically. You may find it if you have a natural area or somewhere where they can kind of get into the moist soil and keep their skin wet, that type of thing. So those are just a few of them that really rely on the oak canopy as part of their life cycle. So like I mentioned before, there's kind of an oak for just about any spot. I brought up this little tree here I just kind of wanted to show you, this was just a little oak seedling. It actually got damaged, so it's kind of hard to see here, but the first year it sprouted and shot up, and it got, I think it actually probably maybe got some animal damage. At least that's what it looks like to me, is that an animal maybe was something like a rabbit or a deer kind of ate it off right there. And so so this year, even though we dug it up, it put on, so from this finger here all the way up to here, this is new growth just this year in the pot, even though the top of the tree got cut off, and even though it's actually in a really heavy soil. This is not a potting soil or anything. This is just, you know, we dug it up from the ground to because it was going to get removed, and so I said, well, let's just try to save it here. But really nice, healthy amount of new growth. And one of the things that I wanted to just talk about, which isn't necessarily oak related, but I mentioned before that we're seeing some fall color because of the drought and warmer than normal summer temperature, late summer temperatures, or early fall, I guess. Two things. I've kind of been harping on this all season long: water, water, water. Get out there and water your trees, specifically if you have some of these, you know, big old trees that would like a more moist soil. So things like pin oaks and things like that. If you've got that, those are going to be more affected by drought than, say, some of the more drought tolerant species like a Bur Oak or a white oak. So if you have those, get some water on those. But even if it isn't one of those species, it has been exceptionally dry. We all have our fingers crossed that we're going to get some rain this afternoon and tomorrow and Monday. It's in the forecast. We'll see what happens. But we are way behind in rainfall. I think the last estimate I heard is that we're somewhere between 12 and 16 inches behind in rainfall, depending upon what area you're in the Chicago area. So if you think about that's somewhere right around here. That amount of water falling on this entire area, that's what we're down. So that's a lot of rainfall that we are short. So we do want to try to get some water on even on our established trees. So get a sprinkler out there, let it run for a couple of hours to kind of mimic a nice slow soaking rain. Even on your old, healthy, established trees, it's still a great idea. So that's number one. Number two, if you do have a tree that is showing some signs of stress, and actually I'm going to ask Caden, who's helping me here with the camera, we're going to just walk over here. We're going to look at this horse chestnut over here. So I just wanted to show you this tree right here. So this horse chestnut, you can see the leaves are really looking pretty shabby. They're already turning brown. Some of them are actually falling off. You can see as I just kind of shake the tree, the leaves are falling off. That for sure is a sign of drought stress. Now, two things. One, horse chestnuts are not very drought tolerant. But secondly, they don't love the heat. And thirdly, they do tend to go into fall dormancy a little bit quicker than some other species. So they're one that we tend to see dropping their leaves earlier in the season, whereas things like the oaks and non-native pear trees are all the way at the opposite end. Black walnuts and horse chestnuts and things like that, we do tend to see them going into dormancy around this time. But the reason that I wanted to come over here and talk to you about this is that there is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with this tree. It is perfectly healthy. It's natural for this tree to be saying, hey, it's too hot, it's too dry, I'm going to shut down for the year. And the reason that I wanted to point this out is I wanted to show you this right here. It's a little more pronounced on a horse chestnut, so it's a little easier to see. This is next year's buds. These are next year's buds right here. So you can see this is a terminal bud right out at the end. This is where the branch is going to elongate from. And then right over here by my pointer finger, right at the base of this leaf, is a new leaf bud. So that is going to be a new leaf next year. And right out here, this is where that branch is going to extend from next year. So that's going to leaf out and extend from here. So as I look through this branch with all of these leaves that are turning brown, and many of them are falling right off, and the petiole, which is this, like what we would, the petiole is this whole leaf stem right here. And on a lot of these, they're just falling right off. I barely have to touch them. That's because those buds have grown and swollen to the point where these petioles can fall off. So that means that this tree is well, it's really set up well for spring of 2022. There is nothing wrong with this tree. If you have a tree in your yard and you're starting to see some signs of drought stress, one of the things that you may want to do is go look at that tree and see if you can identify next year's buds. If they are on there and they're good and healthy, and what I'll do here, even though it's probably not the best thing in the world, I'm going to pick one of these off. It's probably hard to see, but it is green right there where I picked it off from. I know it's not like bright green, but it's green. That means that this bud is healthy and is still connected to the tree and getting moisture and all of that good stuff. And if you look at the spot where I picked it from, you can see that that's nice and green right there. So this tree is all set for next year. Now, if I picked off this bud and it was dried out and it was brown right there or black, and that little tip where I picked it from was brown or dried out, that means that this bud is dead, or that maybe that whole branch is dead. So that would be a sign of extreme stress, possibly branch death. So that would be a little more cause for concern. So one of the things you can do is you can go out and you can look at some of those plants and take a peek at the buds, see what, maybe gauge the health of the tree, and then kind of determine what to do from there. If it is starting to turn brown, those buds are brown and not looking great, maybe that's when you start to get an arborist involved, or you come out and see us with some branch samples, something like that. But if your tree looks like this, my recommendation is very simple. Get a sprinkler or hose out there, get some water on that tree. We're not talking every day, we're not talking maybe even every week. If you have a well-established tree, if it's been in the ground for 3 or 4 years or more, I would say about once every 10 to 14 days would be perfectly fine for getting water on that tree. If you have a tree that has been planted for less than 4 years in the ground, I would probably recommend more like once a week. Newer planted trees, 30 to 40 minutes, slow trickling hose placed right at the base of the tree. So when I say right at the base of the tree, I literally mean right at the base of the tree. So just take that garden hose, put that right there next to the trunk, slow trickle, just a little faster than a trickle, and just let that soak in and hydrate this whole root ball. Here's what I wanted to point out. You can see there's a lot of little fibrous roots right up here on the top. If you water with a sprinkler, these are going to get some water, and that's fine. But when you water with a sprinkler, especially if you're, I should say, like relying on your irrigation system, where you only leave a sprinkler on for 20 minutes or a half hour, that's maybe going to go down about 2 inches. So in this upper 2 inches of soil, you're going to have some fibrous little roots like this. Those can take up a small amount of water very quickly, and that's it. The roots that have big water holding capacity are down lower, much lower down here. So, excuse me, in order to effectively water a tree like this, we want to make sure that we get water all the way down to the bottom of the root system, so that when it starts to get hot and dry, this area up here starts to dry out, but there's still moisture way down here. As the tree's pulling all of that moisture up, then we can say, hey, it's now time to give this tree a really good soaking, because it's used up all of this water in this whole kind of soil profile. So put the hose at the base of the tree, let it trickle for 30 or 40 minutes if it's a tree that was planted in the last couple of years. If it's been in the ground 2 to 4 years, I'd probably recommend hour or hour and a half with that slow trickling hose. So you're hydrating where the root system was when it was planted. You're also hydrating that soil out and around it, so that the roots can continue to go out. The other reason we like to do those deep waterings is it encourages the roots to go deeper and deeper. If we're only relying on that upper surface area there, and we do get a period of exceptional heat, you know, a week of 100+ degree temperatures and little or no rain, you're going to have a problem, or that tree is going to have a problem, because it doesn't have any water holding capacity. So we want those roots to go down deep where they can find more soil moisture, and where they can really root in and not have issues down the road. So I hope that helps a little bit about watering. I hope you learned a little something about buds, and not to be too terribly concerned about brown, drought stress looking leaves right now. Get some water on them. If you do have a really stressed out tree, there's a great fertilizer called Biopack Plus. Biopack Plus is a micronutrient fertilizer. It's very low in nitrogen, so it's not going to push a lot of green growth right away. It's going to give the trees all of the micronutrients that it needs, the sulfur and boron and manganese and things like that. It also has a lot of humic acid in it, which is something that helps coat and protect the root system. So for lack of a better analogy, I say it's like giving your tree a multivitamin and taking it for a day at the spa. So it's a stress relieving fertilizer. It works really well. You just mix it with water in like a 5-gallon bucket and pour it around the root area of the tree. If it's a new tree, that root area is going to be basically right where the root ball is or was. If it's a little more established tree, you may want to go out to the drip line, which is where the branches extend to, and kind of pour that in the soil out around the drip line, because that's where those fibrous feeder roots should be on a little more established tree. So you can fertilize with Biopack Plus. You can do that in October. You could do that again in April, May, or June. You can do it monthly throughout the growing season, because as I mentioned, it does not have a lot of nitrogen in it, so you're not going to burn the tree. So you can water, you can fertilize with Biopack Plus. The other thing that you can be doing to prevent or reduce stress is making sure that you have a nice layer of mulch around the tree. So obviously this is a young tree right here. We would want to make sure that this whole tree gets a nice 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch all the way around its root system. So if we were planting this tree, we would want to cover the root system and any of the surrounding ground here with 2 to 3 inches of hardwood mulch or leaf mulch, something along those lines. But we want to make sure that we have no mulch touching the trunk of the tree. So what I like to do is dump that mulch, spread it all out, get my nice 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch all the way around, and then I go in just by hand and I just pull that mulch back just a couple inches away from the trunk all the way around. We don't want any mulch touching the tree. The bark is supposed to be, or designed to be, exposed to air. Roots are supposed to be exposed or in contact with moisture and soil and that type of thing. 2 totally different types of tissue. What we don't want is bark in constant contact with moisture. So if we've got mulch, which tends to retain moisture, like a sponge, we don't want that up against the bark, because that bark is going to start to think that it's a root. It's going to start to change, and it's going to start to fall apart. Sometimes you get rot issues. Sometimes it brings insects in there, or sometimes it just starts rooting right out of here, which is not a good thing either. It's really stressful on your tree to have mulch way up against the trunk, especially if you do one of these volcano things that you see around town where people are coming in, and a lot of times they're doing it because they saw a landscaper do it, which is just awful. They'll bury the tree trunk 10 or 12 or 20 inches with mulch and then taper it down like a volcano. It's literally probably the worst thing you can do for your tree. So 2 to 3 inches of mulch, make sure none of it's touching the trunk. Just pull it right away from the trunk, and that's going to help protect the root system. Some of those upper surface roots are going to be protected from drying winds, exceptional sun, things like that. It's also going to help protect that a little bit in the wintertime when the ground starts to freeze. When you get those cold nights earlier in the year, it's going to protect that a bit. So it does a good job of insulating. And then it also helps keep the soil cooler so that moisture that is there can stick around a little bit longer. So you can fertilize with the micronutrient pack like Biopack Plus. You can water, and you can mulch your tree. So those are the 3 things that you could do right now. And all of those things are true of shrubs as well. Any of your woody plant material, trees, shrubs, etc., you can do that too. So water, nutrients, and mulch. Those are the 3 things that you can be doing at this time of year to help reduce stress on your trees. You can definitely be planting trees at this time of year. We actually will start fresh digging trees from our nursery again, probably later this week or early next, depending upon what the weather does. So we can actually dig trees fresh from the field. We have a great selection here in the sales yard still, and we're going to be planting all the way through October, all the way through November, and even into early December. There are a couple of things that we wouldn't be planting that late into the year. In December, we wouldn't want to be planting our softer needled evergreens or things like redbud or birch. But aside from that, our oaks, our maples, our lindens, flowering crab apples, and a host of other trees can all be planted for the next 2 months anyway, if not a little bit more. So lots of time to get a tree planted if that's something that you'd like to do. And then there's also it's also a great time for shrub planting as well. So I hope that you found today's talk useful. If you ever have any questions about oaks, tree planting, tree care, all of that kind of stuff, please feel free to come in and see us. We'd be happy to answer those questions for you. We've got an excellent staff of knowledgeable folks here who can help you pick the right plant for your yard, help you with water and soil and nutrient things like that. So just come and see us. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful weekend.